Come on, get your cockles. Je voudrais. Yeah, what's that? Les petits manger. Breakfast, is it? Deux billets. 2 tickets, s'il vous plaît. Anytime, governor. Come again. Down and out in Paris and London. The podcast. Chapter 23. Damn, I did it again. Chapter 36. I'm going absolutely insane sitting in this room. You can't believe it. I've not even got the light on now. I'm just sitting in the dark with a microphone. I mean, it's grim. It really. I mean, you know, this puts it into perspective. It's not as grim as these poor devils in this in the spike, but you know, it's grim enough. So here we are. This is chapter 36, and it's self-justifying this, but he literally wants to set down some general remarks about tramps. So it's very self-aware, self-conscious narrative, and this is very objective. It's what we don't tend to find in Funda. We don't find Anna Funda telling us about her thoughts on the stars necessarily. She leaves that for us to work out for ourselves, although, you know, we're expected, I think, to agree with her, and it's sort of rhetorical in that sense. But here we have a little bit more didactic approach, which we've seen before. So here is Orwell justifying his position and telling us his thoughts. And there's strong socialist comments here as well, which we'll look at as we get to it. Off we go then.
I want to set down some general remarks about tramps. When one comes to think of it, tramps are a queer product and worth thinking over. It is queer that a tribe of men, tens of thousands in number, should be marching up and down England like so many wandering Jews. But though the case obviously...
I was trying to do a scratching record sound there, but I didn't do it very well. Wandering Jews. You've heard of Wandering Jews, haven't you? You've all read The Rime of the Ancient Mariner by old Sammy Coleridge. Anyway, it's a reference. It's a myth. That the idea that the wandering Jews were cursed to wander the earth, sort of made immortal and cursed to wander the earth. Yet again, you know, the Jewish population being isolated and demonized, I guess. But yeah, that's where that comes from. So these tramps, I suppose, in a sense, are destined to walk the earth constantly. I mean, the reason they're called tramps is always having to move and tramp around to travel from one place to the next in order to get a bed for the next night.
Once considering, one cannot even start to consider it until one has got rid of certain prejudices. These prejudices are rooted in the idea that every tramp, ipso facto, is a blackguard. In childhood, we have been taught that tramps are blackguards, and consequently there exists in our minds a sort of ideal or typical tramp.
So the word blackguard is another one of those words that when you first see it written down, you think, is it pronounced blackguard? And you know, you've heard the word. In fact, I think there's a spelling of blackguard now, which is just double G-A-R-D. I'm sure the word has undergone some change because of pronunciation. It's a bit like the gunnels of a ship. If you say it's loaded up to the gunnels, it means up to the ridge of the side of the ship, when it's up to the bit that the water could come over. You know, the side of the boat. And it's spelt gun whales, as in whales, the animal, gun whales, but it's pronounced gunnels. Anyway, that's not relevant. Ipso facto, you'll know that from your Latin, I imagine, sort of by the very fact. So it's proven by the very fact that these. I didn't explain what blackguards are, did I? I just waffled on about the word itself. It means, as you probably thought, it means dishonest. And so we're sort of taught and we learn inherently, I guess, that tramps are dishonest, possibly. Certainly at the time this was written. I don't know quite how much that's the case now.
A repulsive, rather dangerous creature who would die rather than work or wash.
Creature there is another example of chromomorphism.
And wants nothing but to beg, drink, and rob hen houses. This tramp monster is no truer to life than the sinister Chinaman of the magazine stories. But he is very hard to get rid of.
I don't know how familiar you are with late Victorian, early Edwardian detective fiction. It was one of my passions when I was younger. So much so that I wrote my dissertation on detective fiction. And there was a rule in detective fiction that said that it must not be a Chinaman. Oh, sorry. I should put the light on, really. I'm sitting in the dark, sending myself to sleep. That's the rules of detective fiction is it can never be a Chinaman or a person from a Chinese man, I should say, a Chinaman, a Chinese man, because it was almost seen as too obvious. It was too that it was just an obvious cop out if the person who done it was a Chinese person. So that's there was a very inherent casual racism against Chinese people at that time.
The very word tramp evokes his image, and the belief in him obscures the real questions of vagrancy. To take a fundamental question about vagrancy, why do tramps exist at all? It is a curious thing, but very few people know what makes a tramp take to the road. And because of the belief in the tramp monster, the most fantastic reasons are suggested.
Now, we've seen that phrase tramp monster twice now, and it becomes this phrase that he uses. It's more dehumanization of tramps. Now, let's be clear here, this isn't Orwell dehumanizing tramps as such. He's actually defending them, isn't he? But he's explaining that we as a people, as a culture, as a society, demonize tramps to be this tramp monster. So it's chromomorphism, but it's worth exploring why he does that. And that's important. So it is subjective rather. It is Orwell's opinion, but he's doing it for a reason, to sort of, I suppose, to present the tramps in a better light and to explain why society shuns them in the way that it does.
It is said, for instance, that tramps tramp to avoid work, to beg more easily, to seek opportunities for crime, even, least probable of reasons, because they like tramping. I have even read in a book of criminology that the tramp is an atavism, a throwback to the nomadic stage of humanity. And meanwhile, the quite obvious cause of vagrancy is staring one in the face. Of course a tramp is not a nomadic atavism. One might as well say that a commercial traveller is an atavism. A tramp tramps not because he likes it, but for the same reason as a car keeps to the left, because there happens to be a law compelling him to do so.
So again, you've probably worked this out if you weren't sure of that word atavism from the context, but it's repeated so many times. But it means to revert back to something earlier. So I suppose in a way like the sort of steampunk idea is an atavism. It's trying to revert back to something older or more archaic. In this case, the tramp lifestyle is seen as a reverting back to the prehistoric or indigenous tribe of nomadic lifestyle. But of course, Orwell says that's nonsense.
A destitute man, if he is not supported by the parish, can only get relief at the casual wards, and as each casual ward will only admit him for one night, he is automatically kept moving. He is a vagrant because, in the state of the law, it is that or starve. But people have been brought up to believe in the tramp monster, and so they prefer to think that there must be some more or less villainous motive for tramping. As a matter of fact, very little of the tramp monster will survive inquiry.
It's perhaps worth marking just how many times he does say tramp monster here. So this repetition is important. It becomes as sort of as insidious, I suppose, in this narrative. By using the word again and again, it becomes insidious in the way that it does in our consciousness, or the way in which he's saying that at the time period in the consciousness, people believed in the tramp monster because that's just what people were told. That's just sort of how you're brought up to think. And in a way, isn't he doing the same thing by using that word again and again? It's aligning the tramps with the monster. It's dehumanizing them further and further every time. Again, I'm not judging Orwell for doing that. I think he's doing it for a very good reason, to actually explain the process and unpick and analyse and evaluate the reasons why society does shun tramps so much. But certainly worth picking out that language. I would certainly have that as probably something you can use in the coursework, I would say.
Take the generally accepted idea that tramps are dangerous characters. Quite apart from experience, one can say a priori that very few tramps are dangerous because if they were dangerous, they would be treated accordingly. A casual ward will often admit 100 tramps in one night, and these are handled by a staff of at most 3 porters.
I just missed that. Forgot to stop it there. A priori, the Latin there, sort of the theoretical in a way, isn't it? It means sort of theory rather than with evidence base. So you can say in theory that very few tramps are dangerous. So it's just another way of saying it in theory rather than empirical evidence.
100 ruffians could not be controlled by 3 unarmed men. Indeed, When one sees how tramps let themselves be bullied by the workhouse officials, it is obvious that they are the most docile, broken-spirited creatures imaginable. Or take the idea that all tramps are drunkards, an idea ridiculous on the face of it. No doubt many tramps would drink if they got the chance, but in the nature of things they cannot get the chance. At this moment a pale, watery stuff called beer is 7p a pint in England. To be drunk on it would cost at least £0.50, and a man who can command £0.50 at all often is not a tramp. The idea that tramps are impudent social parasites, sturdy beggars, is not absolutely unfounded, but it is only true in a few % of the cases. Deliberate, cynical parasitism, such as one reads of in Jack London's books on American tramping, is not in the English character.
So we've got zoomorphism there being compared to parasites again, with also an exophoric reference to Jack London's books on American tramping. So another just a cultural reference there of the time period, and an exophoric reference to his books on American tramping.
The English are a conscience-ridden race, with a strong sense of the sinfulness of poverty. One cannot imagine the average Englishman deliberately turning parasite, and this national character does not necessarily change because a man is thrown out of work. Indeed, if one remembers that a tramp is only an Englishman out of work, forced by law to live as a vagabond, then the tramp monster vanishes. I'm not saying, of course, that most tramps are ideal characters. I am only saying that they are ordinary human beings, and that if they are worse than other people, it is the result and not the cause of their way of life.
And that's a really important social commentary, that ending with there, really, or well, there's some more to come, but that last little bit there is particularly profound, I think, that it's society that's caused their way of life, not the result. Let me read that. That they are worse than the people. It's the result and not the cause of their way of life. Yeah. So it's not it's not their fault. It's a symptom of how society has treated them, I suppose, is another way of putting it.
It follows that the serve them damned well right attitude that is normally taken towards tramps is no fairer than it would be towards cripples or invalids. When one has realized that, one begins to put oneself in a tramp's place and understand what his life is like. It is an extraordinarily futile, acutely unpleasant life. I have described the casual ward, the routine of a tramp's day, but there are 3 especial evils that need insisting upon.
Now, this is a narrative trick, isn't it? A hook telling us there are 3 things to come, and here are those 3 things. So we've got a triadic structure coming up, and also it's a list, and it's also incremental, but we'll get to the end of that, and we'll talk about it again.
The first is hunger, which is the almost general fate of tramps. The casual ward gives them a ration which is probably not even meant to be sufficient, and anything beyond this must be got by begging, that is, by breaking the law. The result is that nearly every tramp is rotted by malnutrition, for proof of which one need only look at the men lining up outside any casual ward. The second great evil of a tramp's life, it seems much smaller at first sight, but it is a good second, is that he is entirely cut off from contact with women. This point needs elaborating. Tramps are cut off from women in the first place because there are very few women at their level of society. One might imagine that among destitute people the sexes would be as equally balanced as elsewhere, but it is not so. In fact, one can almost say that below a certain level, society is entirely male. The following figures, published by the LCC from a night census taken on February the 13th, 1931, will show the relative numbers of destitute men and destitute women. Spending the night in the streets, 60 men, 18 women. In shelters and homes not licensed as common lodging houses, 1,057 men, 137 women. In the crypt of St. Martin's in the Fields Church, 88 men, 12 women. In LCC casual wards and hostels, 674 men, 15 women. It will be seen from these figures that at the charity level, men outnumber women by something like 10 to 1. The cause is presumably that unemployment affects women less than men. Also that any presentable woman can, in the last resort, attach herself to some man. The result for a tramp is that he is condemned to perpetual celibacy. For of course it goes without saying that if a tramp finds no women at his own level, those above, even a very little above, are as far out of his reach as the moon. The reasons are not worth discussing, but there is no doubt that women never, or hardly ever, condescend to men who are much poorer than themselves. A tramp, therefore, is a celibate from the moment when he takes to the road. He is absolutely without hope of getting a wife, a mistress, or any kind of woman except, very rarely, when he can raise a few shillings, a prostitute. It is obvious what the results of this must be. Homosexuality, for instance, and occasional rape cases. But deeper than these, there is the degradation worked in a man who knows that he is not even considered fit for marriage. The sexual impulse, not to put it any higher, is a fundamental impulse, and starvation of it can be almost as demoralizing as physical hunger. The evil of poverty is not so much that it makes a man suffer as that it rots him physically and spiritually, and there can be no doubt that sexual starvation contributes to this rotting process. Cut off from the whole race of women, a tramp feels himself degraded to the rank of a cripple or a lunatic. No humiliation could do more damage to a man's self-respect.
And that's a superlative there, isn't it? No humiliation could do more damage to a man's self-respect. And that's quite a profound commentary, isn't it, really, on the psychological effects of being a tramp. Not so much the physical ones, although we've looked at those. This now has gone a bit deeper, and he's now speculating, and it is a speculation because he's not suffered in the way they have, in the way that Funder didn't suffer like the people had suffered in Stasiland. And yet he's speculating really on what it does to somebody's psychology and some psyche and their, as he says, self-respect and self-esteem, I suppose, as well.
The other great evil of a tramp's life is enforced idleness. By our vagrancy laws, things are so arranged that when he is not walking the road, he is sitting in a cell, or in the intervals, lying on the ground waiting for the casual ward to open. It is obvious that this is a dismal, demoralizing way of life, especially for an uneducated man. Besides these, one could enumerate scores of minor evils, to name only one: discomfort, which is inseparable from life on the road. It is worth remembering that the average tramp has no clothes but what he stands up in, wears boots that are ill-fitting, and does not sit in a chair for months together. But the important point is that a tramp's sufferings are entirely useless. He lives a fantastically disagreeable life and lives it to no purpose whatever. One could not, in fact, invent a more futile routine than walking from prison to prison, spending perhaps 18 hours a day in the cell and on the road. There must be at the least several tens of thousands of tramps in England. Each day they expend innumerable foot-pounds of energy, enough to plough thousands of acres, build miles of road, put up dozens of houses in mere, useless walking. Each day they waste between them possibly 10 years of time in staring at cell walls. They cost the country at least £1 a week a man, and give nothing in return for it. They go round and round on an endless boring game of general post, which is of no use, and is not even meant to be of any use to any person whatever. The law keeps this process going, and we have got so accustomed to it that we are not surprised, but it is very silly. Granting the futility of a tramp's life, the question is whether anything could be done to improve it. Obviously it would be possible, for instance, to make the casual wards a little more habitable, and this is actually being done in some cases. During the last year, some of the casual wards have been improved beyond recognition, if the accounts are true, and there is talk of doing the same to all of them. But this does not go to the heart of the problem. The problem is how to turn the tramp from a bored, half-alive vagrant into a self-respecting human being. A mere increase of comfort cannot do this. Even if the casual wards became positively luxurious, they never will, a tramp's life would still be wasted. He would still be a pauper, cut off from marriage and home life, and a dead loss to the community. What is needed is to depauperize him, and this can only be done by finding him work, not work for the sake of working, but work of which he can enjoy the benefit. At present, in the great majority of casual wards, tramps do no work whatever. At one time they were made to break stones for their food, but this was stopped when they had broken enough stone for years ahead and put the stone breakers out of work. Nowadays they are kept idle because there is seemingly nothing for them to do. Yet there is a fairly obvious way of making them useful, namely this: each workhouse could run a small farm, or at least a kitchen garden, and every able-bodied tramp who presented himself could be made to do a sound day's work. The produce of the farm or garden could be used for feeding the tramps, and at the worst it would be better than the filthy diet of bread and margarine and tea. Of course, the casual wards could never be quite self-supporting, but they could go a long way towards it, and the rates would probably benefit in the long run. It must be remembered that under the present system tramps are as dead a loss to the country as they could possibly be, for they not only do no work, but they live on a diet that is bound to undermine their health. The system, therefore, loses lives as well as money. A scheme which fed them decently and made them produce at least a part of their own food would be worth trying.
And of course, what Orwell's saying there is he's looking for social reform. So in a way that in Thunder there was no need to as such, because the social reform had already taken place with the fall of the Berlin Wall and the end of the GDR. Here, Orwell sees no end to this, and clearly we still live in a world where homelessness is all too commonplace. And so Orwell here is actually looking for and suggesting ways of fabricating that social reform. So it's an interesting difference and a different subjective opinion to Thunder's, but it's possibly a good point you could use between the two texts as to how not only the time is different and the context is different, but also their perspectives are different and the need to be didactic is different. There's more need for Orwell to be didactic, I would say, than there is for Thunder, because for her the regime has finished. It's ended. Sorry, regime, not regime. Regime. Let's push on a bit further.
It may be objected that a farm or even a garden could not be run with casual labour, but there is no real reason why tramps should only stay a day at each casual ward. They might stay a month or even a year if there were work for them to do. The constant circulation of tramps is something quite artificial. At present, a tramp is an expense to the rates, and the object of each workhouse is therefore to push him on to the next, hence the rule that he can stay only one night. If he returns within a month, he is penalised by being confined for a week, and as this is much the same as being in prison, naturally he keeps moving. But if he represented labour to the workhouse, and the workhouse represented sound food to him, it would be another matter. The workhouses would develop into partially self-supporting institutions, and the tramps, settling down here or there according as they were needed, would cease to be tramps. They would be doing something comparatively useful, getting decent food, and living a settled life. By degrees, if the scheme worked well, they might even cease to be regarded as paupers, and be able to marry, and take a respectable place in society. This is only a rough idea, and there are some obvious objections to it. Nevertheless, it does suggest a way of improving the status of tramps without piling new burdens on the rates, and the solution must, in any case, be something of this kind. For the question is, what to do with men who are underfed and idle, and the answer, to make them grow their own food, imposes itself automatically.
So to round off that chapter, he uses, I suppose, to enhance his social reform message, he uses anthropophora to raise a question and then answers the question. So that's I'll recap the spelling there. ANTHYPOPHORA, anthropophora, raising a question and then answering your own question. And he does that literally here. He says, for the question is, and the answer, to make them grow their own food, imposes itself automatically. So it's a very convincing and rhetorical finish to the chapter, which of course he wants, because he wants to do some good. He wants this book, this research that he's done, this living his life in the way he has done, to actually offer some chance of social reform. Okay, let's finish there for this one, then we'll come back for chapter 37, the penultimate chapter.